Hi, I'm Bob Humphrey with another tip from Yamaha Outdoors. We're down here in Florida. It's an early season turkey hunt, and I've got Will Brantley, who is the hunting editor for Field and Stream, with me. Will, what would be a good tip, maybe your number one tip for early season calling turkeys?
You know, Bob, early in the season, your flocks are starting to break up. They've been together all winter. They're starting to break up. Gobblers are establishing their pecking orders. Turkeys are really vocal this time of year. Kind of the old, quip of cluck once or twice every hour. It doesn't really cut it this time of year. This time of year, I like to be really loud, really aggressive. I'm kind of an aggressive caller anyway, but particularly in the early season. The idea is you're calling at numbers of birds. You want to make a lot of noise because they're making a lot of noise. It's just like calling any other wild game. You want to match what you're hearing in the woods.
Yeah, well, that sounds like a good tip, and I like it because I like to call a lot. So thanks very much. Hopefully that'll help you folks out there. Another reason why you might want to call a lot early in the spring is because of subordinate or satellite toms. They sort of hang around the flock, and they've maybe been beat down a little bit by the dominant tom, but if they hear a distant bird, they think it might be a lone hen, they might break off from the flock and try to get a chance to slip in there. So you might get those younger birds, 2-year-olds. They're not the big old limb hangers that we all dream of, but sometimes they give us a little boost in confidence and make us feel like a turkey hunter, and that's just one more reason why aggressive calling sometimes is a good tip for early in the spring. Patience is always important when you're turkey hunting, but it can be especially so when you're calling early in the season. Again, those birds are flocked up, they're grouped up, the toms have their harem of hens that they want to spend the day with, so you're going to have a tough time calling them away, but sit tight. Okay, they heard your calling. They remember that. They remember that location. And 2-3 hours from now, when those hens start to break off from the flock, the toms suddenly find themselves alone, and they may wander back. And if you're still there where they remembered that calling the 2-3 hours earlier, they may saunter in. Be alert, because you may not get a response. They may just slip in quietly, or they may fire up at 9-10 in the morning, and then when they're alone and they're really fired up, then you can be in the game. Another thing to bear in mind is that early season might mean different things in different parts of the country, because seasons often start at different times. Southern seasons typically begin a lot earlier, and that's really the early season that we're talking about. As you move up north, those turkeys everywhere go through certain transitions, certain phases of behavior in the spring, and it may be a month or as much as 2 months later in the north, but it still might be that early season that we're talking about when you want to be really aggressive, when those winter flocks have just broken up, the toms are still henned up, they're still in big groups, and those older birds are harder to call, but again, you might get one of those stray satellite birds, one of those 2-year-old birds, to break off and call them in. But try to look at the bird's behavior and see what phase they're in, what behavioral phase of the spring they're in. If they're in that early stage, early in the season, then these tips all apply. Okay, we talked to Will Brantley, and now I'm with Steve Hickhoff, Realtree's turkey hunting editor. Will has a very aggressive, he likes to call a lot in the early spring. What is a tip that you might offer?
Well, like you, Bob, I love to call aggressively. I think calls are calls for a reason. I mean, you got to use them, but there comes a point, if you love calling as much as we do, there comes a point when that gobbler hangs up and you've got to shut up. And the reason that works sometimes is because he's come looking, he wants you to come to him. He thinks a hen's there or hens, and if you shut up, sometimes that'll just coax him the distance without calling.
So the key then is to know when to hold them and when to fold them.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks, Steve.
You're welcome.
It's also important to remember that turkey calling is very interactive any time of the season. You give a call and you check out the bird's temperament. You listen to the way he responds to the call. If he's aggressive, then by all means you can be aggressive, but if he doesn't seem to be too interested, you might want to tone it back. That's more the type of calling that you're going to do later in the season, but If you catch a bird in the wrong mood early in the season, you're still going to want to tone it down a little bit, test them out, and get to a point where they're receptive. Well, that about covers it for this time, but please check back again soon and often with Yamaha Outdoors.